want to start and say thank you for the likes and the comments. Always appreciate the comments. And thank you to the new subscribers. Glad you're here. And I had some leftover gummies from the last video. And I found this book. I was at my parents today. There's all kinds of books, but I found Ghost Stories of Illinois. And they're just short, ghost stories. Thought they'd be kind of fun to read. And I'm from Illinois, so sort of fitting. So this first one is called Abraham Lincoln in the Spirit World. On the morning of April 14th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln called a cabinet meeting. He sat at the table in the council chambers as the members filed in, but for some time seemed not to notice them. Lincoln's face was buried in his hands. When he finally found the strength to raise his head, the expression on his face was one of utter anguish. "Gentlemen," the president said, "before long you will have important news." When the men pressed Lincoln for details, he told them of a recurring dream that he'd had for the third time the night before. "It is always the same," he explained. "I am in a boat, alone, on a boundless ocean. I have no oars, no rudder. I am helpless. I drift. Something extraordinary is going to happen, and very soon." They were prophetic words for that evening during a performance of our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. Lincoln was assassinated by a Southern sympathizer named John Wilkes Booth. Abraham Lincoln is remastered as one of the greatest and most beloved leaders in American history. Among those who are interested in supernatural phenomena, he also stands apart as one of the most psychic. While numerous White House families have been known to occasionally rely on alternative guidance, think of the Reagans' use of astrologers, or Hillary Rodham Clinton's famous chats with Eleanor Roosevelt. Lincoln's faith in second sight and connection in the spirit world were no passing fancy. The president's beliefs were deeply ingrained. His clairvoyance was an integral part of his way of life. Throughout his life, he consulted psychics and attended seances. He paid close attention to premonitions and visions and looked for meaning in his dreams. He took advice from those on the other side and felt guided and even manipulated by what he frequently referred to as the hand of God. Moreover, as early as 5 years prior to his death, he knew that he would never serve out his second term as President of the United States. Hours after his election in 1860, while Lincoln was waiting in Springfield, Illinois for the last report on the vote, he had a strange experience. He had retired to his quarters for much-needed rest and was reclining on a settee when he was startled by his reflection in a large mirror opposite him. Lincoln later described the baffling sight to a friend. "My face, I noticed, had two separate and distinct images. One of the faces was a little paler, about 5 shades than the other. Lincoln stood up, and the image melted away. He lay down, and it returned. Every time he attempted to recreate the effect, he was successful. Nevertheless, he was the only one who could see it. The president's wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, was disturbed by his account of the phenomenon. She believed that the corpse-like shadow her husband was projecting was an omen. According to her interpretation, the healthy, normal reflection represented Lincoln's first term in office. The paler, less substantial image symbolized a second term, which he would begin but never finish. 7 days before his fateful outing to the theater, Lincoln had a dream that required much less interpretation. In his journal, he described it. I retired late. I soon began to dream. There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I thought I left my bed and wandered downstairs. There the silence was broken by the same pitiful sobbing, but the mourners were invisible. I went from room to room. No living person was in sight, but the same mournful sounds of distress met me as I passed along. It was light in all the rooms. Every object was familiar to me, but where were all the people who were grieving as if their hearts would break? I was puzzled and alarmed. What could be the meaning of all this? Determined to find the cause of a state of things so mysterious and so shocking, I kept on until I arrived at the east room, which I entered. Before me was a catafalque, on which rested a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards, and there was a throng of people, some gazing mournfully upon the corpse, whose face was covered, others weeping pitifully. Who was dead in the White House? I demanded one of the soldiers. The president, was his answer. He was killed by an assassin. Psychic warning, not to mention the fact that Lincoln had received a number of death threats, one has to wonder why the president still insisted upon his lightly guarded outing to the theater on April 14th, 1865. Perhaps Lincoln refused to lead a life ruled by the fear that must have resulted from such premonitions. Perhaps his fatalistic view of the universe led him to believe that no matter what choices he made, he could not alter what was meant to be. He once wrote in a letter to a friend that he often felt controlled by some other power than his own will. And so it was. President Abraham Lincoln was warned but not saved by his psychic talents. He received a single gunshot to the back of his head and expired within hours. The assassination would not be the end, however, for according to many reports, the late Lincoln was able to appear to the living as easily as the living man had communicated with the dead. Lincoln's body was transported home to Springfield by train. Upon arrival, it was placed in a special receiving vault near the beautiful mausoleum that was being constructed. Within days, the first reported sightings of the late president's ghost surfaced. He had been seen pacing the path before the temporary crypt in the mausoleum, a tall, thin, somber figure. If Lincoln's spirit was overseeing the project, its completion brought him no peace. After his remains were moved into their final resting place, visitors to the tomb were often disturbed by the sounds of sobbing and footsteps coming from within. Abraham Lincoln's spirit seemed to be as tireless as was the man himself, and soon it became clear that he would not be limiting his ghostly visitations to Oak Ridge Cemetery. In death, Lincoln seemed anxious to haunt all the places that had been meaningful to him in life. His ghost became known as one of the most well-traveled citizens of the afterlife. His familiar, lanky frame and awkward gait have been identified many times in the dark, shadowy shape that walks the streets surrounding the old courthouse in Springfield. It was there that Lincoln pleaded numerous cases as a young lawyer. It has also long been rumored that the historical Lincoln home in Springfield is haunted by him. There a tall, thin apparition is accompanied by the ghost of a young boy. The man is no doubt Lincoln. Excuse me. The boy, very likely his beloved son Willie, who predeceased the president by 3 years. Over the years, many well-documented sightings of Lincoln's ghost have been outside of Illinois, and the place where he spent the most traumatic years of his life. The list of those who have seen or sensed Lincoln's presence in the White House is distinguished and long. Numerous presidents, including Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower, felt that the great emancipator will still occupy many of the historic rooms where they worked and lived. Calvin Coolidge's wife, Grace, saw Lincoln's distinctive silhouette standing at a window in the Oval Office, gazing out over the Potomac. Since then, many others, including the famous poet Carl Sandburg, have reported seeing or feeling Lincoln's spirit in the same location. Roosevelt used Lincoln's former bedroom as a study. Often as she was writing late at night, she would have the overwhelming sense that she was not alone. Looking over her shoulder, she would find no one there. Eventually, she simply assumed that Lincoln was keeping her company. Visitors to the White House have also been known to encounter the ghost of the 16th President, Winston Churchill. I screwed up. Winston Churchill, who is known to be influenced by premonitory visions of his own, is said to have seen Lincoln's ghost while on an official visit. During a visit to President Roosevelt, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands was once awakened by knocking at her bedroom door. She rose from her bed to open the door and a moment later fell to the floor in a dead faint. There, waiting to be admitted, was the semi-transparent figure of Abraham Lincoln. presence in the White House has often been explained as a residual effect of the enormous energy expended there during the traumatic years of the Civil War. The concentration of emotions Sorry, I had to clear my throat a little. That concentration of emotion was matched by the sorrow the nation felt when he died. The funeral train that bore his body from Washington to Springfield was met along its route by more than 7 million grieving Americans. This outpouring of sorrow must have left its own psychic mark, for a phantom version of the train is said to retrace its passage every year on the anniversary of the somber journey. The legend tells of two spectral steamers. The first pulls several cars that are draped in black. In one car, shadowy instruments play mournful dirges. A macabre audience of skeletons looks on. The second engine pulls only a single flatbed car, which is covered in black carpeting and bears the coffin containing Lincoln's body. The Albany Evening Times once described the eerie change in atmosphere that was said to accompany the strange event. The air on the tracks became very keen and cutting. On either side of the tracks it is warm and still. Every watchman, when he feels the air, slips off the track and sits down to watch. If a real train were passing, its noise would be hushed as if the phantom train rode over it. Clocks and watches always stop as the phantom train goes by, and when looked at are 5 to 8 minutes behind. Almost done. Strangely, the ghost train allegedly never reaches Springfield. In Illinois, the state that calls itself the land of Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln is still a formidable presence. His name graces countless organizations, and his home and tomb are perennial tourist draws. Beyond these immortalizing honors, however, Lincoln seems to have truly remained among us in spirit. For more than 135 years, his ghost has defied the grave. In Lincoln's second inaugural address, given shortly before his assassination, he implored, "Let us strive on to finish the work we are in." Within weeks, his natural life was cut short, yet one can't help but wonder if Abraham Lincoln is not still walking among us, striving to finish that work. Sorry, I just accidentally turned my PC on and it's a little loud, but I should be going to sleep. Go to sleep. I'm just gonna finish these. I thought I'd read more, but that one was one of the longer ones, I think. I looked through some of the others and they seem shorter, so I don't know. I've always liked ghosts, supernatural type stuff. It's always been kind of interesting to me. I just did it again somehow. Hopefully it's not, it shouldn't be like overwhelmingly loud, I don't think. Last dinosaur. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you guys are all doing well and have a good one.